Welcome to Yahoo Finance Sports Report, a unique look at the business of sports, brought to you by Yahoo Finance and Yahoo Sports. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano, and I'm here to coach you through the financial game. Let's huddle up and get right into it. We are kicking off this week with Pomp's Playbook, where I take a look at some of the biggest headlines in sports that you and your portfolio need to know. First up in today's playbook, let's talk about the MLB playoffs. With ESPN dropping its MLB coverage after this season, the worldwide leader in sports is going out with a bang. ESPN's exclusive wildcard series to kick off the MLB playoffs averaged 4.6 million viewers across 11 games. That's a 64% increase year over year and the best ratings that ESPN has ever seen under MLB's new playoff format. Even better, younger audiences provided the growth, with under 35 viewership up 89% and kids 17 and under up 108%. So while ESPN might be done with MLB after this season, at least they are going out with historic numbers. Next up, we need to talk about Cristiano Ronaldo. According to Bloomberg, Cristiano Ronaldo's net worth recently surpassed $1.4 billion, making him the first billionaire player in the history of world football. Ronaldo's contract with Saudi club Al Nassr is worth over $400 million and entirely tax-free. He also earned $550 million in salary and $175 million in endorsement income between 2002 and 2023. Now, Ronaldo joins an elite group of billionaire athletes like Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Tiger Woods, and Roger Federer. But even with his family calling for him to retire, the 40-year-old Ronaldo says that he has much more to give on the pitch. Next up, let's talk about the NFL's increasingly popular international series. We all know that the NFL is trying to grow its international audience. This began when the NFL first played games in London in 2007. But now the league plays games all over the world, including Germany, Spain, Brazil, Ireland, and Australia. The Minnesota Vikings actually recently became the first NFL team to play back-to-back international games, with their Week 4 matchup against the Steelers in Dublin averaging 7.9 million viewers. That was the second most watched international NFL game ever on NFL Network. And last up in today's playbook, let's talk about the World Cup. FIFA just launched its official 2026 World Cup resale site, and let me tell you, it's pricey. FIFA says that both buyers and sellers will be charged a 15% fee per transaction, and dynamic pricing means ticket listings can surge far above face value, with some seats already posted for tens of thousands of dollars. This is a major shift from past tournaments, where resale was capped at face value with lower fees. Fans and supporter groups are pushing back, but FIFA says pricing reflects North American norms and revenues fund global football development. All right, now that we've covered some of the most interesting stories happening in sports right now, it's time to talk football. Joining us now to discuss some of the biggest storylines going on in college football is Yahoo Sports senior reporter Ross Dellenger. Welcome to the show, Ross. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start with UNC. I feel like Bill Belichick and UNC have been the talk of college football for most of the last year, ever since he was hired. But the season hasn't exactly gotten off to the start that he or anyone at the school would have hoped. Now, they've won 2 games, but they're 2-3, and on a point differential basis, it's actually the worst start in program history, more than 125 years going back. So tell me a little bit about what the state of UNC football is like and what you're hearing from people in and around the program about how they feel things have gone so far.
Yeah, if you, before the season, obviously there was a lot of off the field sort of news around UNC, and there was maybe a thought that, because of Bill Belichick's past as a coach who, seemed to avoid distractions, that once the season started, they would sort of get rolling, so to speak. Not quite, right? They opened up the year with a 48-14 loss to TCU. They won a couple games, Charlotte, Richmond, very much, lower resource sort of programs, and then they have lost by at least 3 touchdowns the last 2 games out against UCF in a Clemson team that was kind of reeling. So they are very much in a state of struggle, and still the off the field sort of distractions remain, right? I think earlier this week it was revealed that the Hulu documentary that was sort of tracking the season to be released postseason would not happen. Not surprisingly, I guess, because they are 2-3, and it shows no signs of getting any better. The schedule only really gets tougher from here. They have to go out to Cal next week after a bye week this week, and then they host a Virginia team that's incredibly improved.
Yeah, and what is your sense on sort of how this all plays out? Like, obviously, it's not a great start, but to your point, things might not get much better. Is this something where UNC and their administrators are willing to sort of let it play out over a year or two, or are they looking at that buyout number of $20 to $30 million over the next couple of years and starting to do calculations on if it might be worth it?
Well, I think that UNC committed a lot of resources and money to this sort of experiment of hiring Bill Belichick, and him then hiring his son as defensive coordinator and another son, and bringing in coaches that he certainly had contacts with in the past, and a general manager that he used to use in the NFL. I think they poured too much into this to bail now. I know they're sort of trying to get fans to be understanding and more patient going forward. So I don't see them making any rash changes.
Yeah. And then I want to talk about Arch Manning at Texas really quickly. I know we spoke previously on the show. You spent some time with him and down at the school before the season started. There was obviously a lot of hype. Things there haven't gone as well either. Now, they're not a bad team, but he hasn't necessarily played up the expectations that might have been unfairly placed on him beforehand. What is your sense of just kind of like his mindset and the feeling around that program specifically, given how things have gone?
Well, I think that there was probably unrealistic expectations on Arch because of his last name, Manning, and his sort of recruiting prowess as, at the time, 3 years ago, the top quarterback prospect in the country. So it was a little probably unfair. And so I don't think he ever would have lived up to expectation unless he won the Heisman this year, and led Texas to the national championship. Those things are not happening. But what's been probably more disappointing for people, and probably for Arch himself, is that, he's really struggled even to play at an sort of adequate or above average level. We're seeing him struggle to process things. He seems to hold the ball pretty long in the backfield. I know Sarkisian, the Texas coach, was asked about that this week. We've seen him miss a lot of passes, right? He's completing roughly about 60% of his passes. He's thrown 5 interceptions in 5 games. So that's been a struggle as well. But you can't forget all the other pieces around him, right? They lost their top couple receivers from last year, and they lost 4 out of 5 starting offensive linemen too. And you can tell that there are a lot of new pieces in Texas's offense.
Yeah, it's interesting to think that 2 of the biggest storylines in the sport have sort of gone downhill since the start of the season, but college football viewership-wise is still more popular than ever. So we'll see how it all plays out. But thank you so much for joining us today, Ross.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, we have to take a quick break, but coming up, we've got the head of women's sports at Priority Sports, Jenna McLaughlin, joining us to discuss the growth of women's sports. Welcome back to Yahoo Finance Sports Report. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano. We've made it to the one-on-one, a conversation where I get to break down news and sports with a key player in the industry. This week, we're speaking with Jenna McLaughlin from Priority Sports about the growth of women's sports. Welcome to the show, Jenna. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd love to just level set the conversation, and maybe if you can just explain a little bit about your role at Priority Sports and what it is that you do.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, Joe. It's great to be here. I started at Priority in January of this year to build out the women's division. So Priority Sports has been around for 37 years, led by and owned by Mark Bartelstein. We represent NBA and NFL players and coaches. And so I was hired to build the women's division. And at this point, really focusing on women's basketball from players to coaches and executives, high school through the WNBA.
What is it about women's basketball specifically that became the main focus rather than some other sports?
Well, for one, it is certainly Priority Sports specialty, and Mark Bartelstein specifically, as well as my subject matter expertise as a former player, coach, and executive search consultant in the women's basketball space specifically. So certainly, and the booming growth of women's basketball specifically, the money being poured into it. So I think that's where we're starting. It doesn't mean it's certainly not where we're going to end, but in year one, that is the focus at this point.
Awesome. I know you guys represent both athletes on the amateur side in college and also on the professional level, and coaches as well. Maybe let's start with the amateur side first, because there's been so many changes with NIL and specifically with the growth of women's college basketball. From an NIL perspective, though, it feels like there are some programs that have a lot of resources and a lot of programs that don't have nearly as many resources. Now, the indication is that each school gets a certain amount of dollars to spend from a revenue sharing perspective, and they have to divide that between the teams, and maybe women's basketball isn't a priority at their school, whereas at other schools, it is. Maybe just tell me a little bit about what you're seeing on the ground level, and more specifically, how this is impacting the competitive environment.
Absolutely. You nailed it right on the head. There's definitely a large disparity from the haves and the have-nots in women's basketball, no different than really any other sport, but specifically because, for example, the SEC, notoriously a very successful Key Four conference, they also have gymnastics and softball who are revenue sharing. So women's basketball specifically might get a smaller piece of that pie in some instances, right? Because revenue some sports get revenue, including gymnastics at an SEC school, where maybe at Big Ten schools, there's a lot more focus on women's basketball. So what we are seeing at the ground level is there are some schools that are getting seven figures to provide to their women's basketball team, and others who are getting significantly less, maybe up to like a tenth of that. So of course, the competitive advantage goes to when we're talking about paying players for their name, image, and likeness and the availability of funds. There's going to be a large gap between the top and the bottom because of that. And it's exacerbated by, I think, the level of talent that some of these big schools can get and keep, where they're not going to the NBA, right? The women's landscape is a little bit different because you're going to have these players for 4 years. So you can really stack rosters with money. So I think that changes the landscape a little bit as well.
Yeah, I'm curious if you think this will change, and if so, how it will change, right? Because my thought process is that it's no secret that athletics are sort of the front door to a university, right? They're a marketing tool to be able to drive enrollment, tuition, et cetera, everything else financially that the school wants to do. And women's basketball sort of sits in this unique spot where the players, to your point, are sort of underfunded to a degree at many of these schools, but the games themselves are actually receiving significant viewership and can be used as an asset for the school to drive enrollment, tuition, et cetera. So do you think that schools will eventually sort of realize that and put more resources towards women's basketball, or do you think we still have a long way to go there?
It's a great question. I think it's very fluid. And Joe, this is how I see it. A lot of these decisions are made by boosters, by board of regents, by boards. And I know that as former executive search consultant placing athletic directors, like those are the decision makers. So those decision makers need to believe that this isn't a bubble, that this is going to continue to drive resources in a meaningful way, that maybe they do get more money in media rights because they get more televised games. So I do think that we have room to see where this goes before we can make a determination like that. I can tell you, I went to the Iowa UCLA game this year at Iowa, and it was as loud as Madison Square Garden Knicks game on December 23rd. And I'm not kidding. I was
believe
sitting
it,
there
yeah.
like, I wish everyone could be here and see this, because Caitlin Clark's on the floor, right? UCLA is the number one team in the country. It comes into Iowa. They barely win. And, that gave me a lot of hope in that moment. Like, listen, this is going to be pervasive if we have talent on the floor. And I think, so to go back to your question, I think there's going to still be an uphill battle to get to a place where there's investment in women's basketball in a meaningful way and potentially more revenue share. But I believe we're going to continue to take steps to get there, and it'll just be a matter of time.
Well, one area where it does feel like there is adequate investment potentially is endorsement deals. I mean, to me, it feels like women's college basketball players are receiving sort of an outsized share of endorsement attention from some of these brands. Is that sort of what you're seeing too?
Yes, marketing for women, there's a huge opportunity. And so even when from a recruiting standpoint, when we're thinking about what are the athletes that we want to go after, it's very different than on the men's side, right? The men's side could, if they're a marketable athlete, that's awesome. For us, if we want to be profitable as an agency, we need to make sure that we are representing marketable women. And that's just the way it is, because 80% or potentially more of their value comes from sponsorships, endorsements, their value off the basketball court, because we know that the revenue share is much more narrow. And so we see that where if they go to a big brand school where name, image, likeness, and they get a lot more followers, they get a lot more marketability. And so you're absolutely right. We are seeing that firsthand.
Switching gears a little bit to the WNBA, the professional level, one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that there seems to be much less patience when it comes to coaching hires and coaching candidates in the WNBA than maybe some other professional sports leagues. One, I want you to tell me if that's sort of the pervasive feeling on the business side as well. But two, maybe just explain a little bit about why that is, right? Like, why is the New York Liberty coach getting fired shortly after winning a WNBA championship? Why are other teams firing coaches after winning seasons or playoff appearances? It feels like there's a much shorter leash than maybe some of the other professional leagues that we've become accustomed to.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of last season, there were 6 open jobs and there was only 12 teams. So 50% of the league had head coaching openings. That was wild. And now with the expansion team, there's 5 open jobs for head coaching. And these are all comfortable positions that are going to be paying, we know now some of the league is making over 7 figures. So one, they're paying a lot more, so they know they can get the caliber that they want in a lot of these cases. And there's a lot more eyeballs, and with eyeballs comes accountability, and winning matters a lot more. So I think ownership is taking a good look at how can we drive more revenue. How do you drive more revenue? You win more games. How do you win more games? You hire better talent, and you attract better talent. So you're seeing investment not just in hopefully higher quality coaches. And again, I'm not speaking as someone judging the coaches, but just from an ownership lens of why there's a lot more turnover, and then their ability to attract talent to these different markets. So yes, there's a lot more turnover. Yes, I expect there to be a lot more turnover in the front office as well over the course of the next few years, because owners are investing a lot more money. The Sparks we see are building a $150 million facility. If they're not winning a lot more after getting Kelsey Plum and investing in all that, like, they're going to look at leadership, right? So I think we're going to continue to see that, and I use them as an example, but we see it across the league.
As someone who helps negotiate these deals and place these coaches with these teams, what are these teams looking for when it comes to a coach, like on their resume? And has that changed as the league has become more popular?
I can tell you what they're looking for now. I wasn't a part of this, a couple of years ago, but they are definitely looking first and foremost at body of work, right? What is your experience coaching? Have you been a head coach? Where have you been a head coach? How much success have you had? So I think bar none, you need to have a body of work and a strong body of work and a history of winning to be considered for these jobs. That's what I would say, number one. Number two is fit. Culturally, right? Not maybe someone at Indiana is not going to be the same fit for Liberty or the Dream or LA, or that definitely matters. And I think when you're talking about cultural fit, that can also be who was just fired and what was their demographic and what was their background. If we just had an assistant coach and they didn't have a lot of success, do we go the opposite direction? Or it depends on your risk tolerance. And I always say everyone's trying to mitigate their liability, right? Like, that's what owners are doing. How do we take a little risk and a lot of reward? And that's why going with body of work and making sure there's a fit. And then the bigger thing is that nobody talks about, that I think is very interesting, because there's a lot of critical people about who gets these jobs, is who can they afford, right? We want to see representation in the league. No one wants to see it more than me, that, we want to see women leading women, of course. But a lot of times, like, the best women are in the highest demand and demand the most money, which they should, right? And I think that's not something that's talked about, but without naming specific names, like, there's some incredible women's basketball coaches in the NCAA who are worth a ton of money, right? Who have lifetime contracts. Why would they go to a WNBA program that hey, listen, all these teams are turning over. Ownership is quick to fire people. So I share that because I think the pipeline is sometimes misunderstood. But certainly those are the things that their owners, I believe, are looking for.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. It's a very interesting point. It takes both supply and demand for it to work out, obviously, but we'll see how all this plays out. It's certainly a fascinating time in women's sports and the WNBA specifically. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jenna.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I hope you have a great day.
The clock is winding down here, but we have just enough time for some final buzz. So let's talk about LIV Golf's recent financial filing. Now, everyone knows that LIV Golf is a new pro golf league backed by Saudi Arabia's public investment fund. But what you may not know is that it has two parts. One in America, called LIV Golf Incorporated, and another international division based in the UK known as LIV Golf Limited. And since one of these businesses is headquartered in the UK, they have to publicly release financial metrics every year. This gives us an inside look into the league's finances. And let's just say it isn't pretty. In 2024, LIV Golf's UK division reported a loss of $462 million. That's more losses than the league saw in 2023 at $396 million, and also more losses than it saw in 2022 at $244 million. Now, since its inception, LIV Golf's international business has now lost more than $1.1 billion, and that doesn't even account for player salaries coming out of the US division. The main reason behind this is simple. LIV has spent massive amounts of money trying to attract star golfers, organize global tournaments, and build a fan base. But despite the losses, there are some bright spots. The league reported $17.1 million in sponsorship revenue last year, a big improvement from previous years. And LIV says that those deals are growing, with major companies like HSBC and Salesforce already signed on for 2025. Saudi Arabia has also issued a letter of support for LIV Golf, guaranteeing financial backing to keep the league running into next year. So where does that leave LIV Golf today? Well, the league is still burning through hundreds of millions of dollars annually, but it has nearly unlimited funding behind it. So the long-term question is whether LIV can ever turn a profit or merge its operations with the PGA Tour. LIV Golf says that it wants to bring golf together under a single global umbrella, but progress has been slow and talks remain uncertain. For now, LIV Golf remains one of the boldest and most expensive bets in sports, a high-risk project that's still trying to prove it can last. We're all out of time, so it's officially game over for this week. Thank you so much to Ross, Jenna, and all of you for joining us. Please make sure to scan the QR code below to follow Yahoo Finance Podcasts for more videos and expert insights, and catch us every Friday wherever you get your podcast. If you follow on Amazon Music, just ask Alexa to play Yahoo Finance Sports Report. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano. See you next time.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.